Can we see me? Can we hear me? Yes? No? Actually, we should be able to. Let me double check, though. Yeah, you should be able to hear me. Hello, everybody. Awesome, thank you. I can be indeed both seen and heard. Those are two extremely important things. I'm Brittany. This, hello, is Hua Chong. And welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch gay things, and sometimes we read them. We have just begun to make our way through Volume 3 of Heaven Official's Blessing. And let me tell you, the first 40-50 pages of this are kind of a little bit of everything, really. We dropped in on Xie Lian 3 years after his first ascension. Kind of got the lay of the land in terms of how that's going. And there was a particularly brutal sequence with a man named Lang Ying burying his small son. And I know that there's something about that name, but I cannot remember it, which I'm sure everybody's sitting there quietly exploding over, but it hasn't occurred to me yet. It's driving me nuts. So if it's driving you nuts, just know that I am also going insane over my own mind blank about the significance of that name. We were on page 57. Yeah, we were on page 57 around the middle, a little bit towards the top. And that's a habitual chronic cough left over from asthma. It pops up sometimes. It's actually not too bad these days, so it shouldn't be too big of a problem, but we just kind of get over it for these streams. And let's see. We're trying to get through 50 pages is the goal, because we're used to starting at 3:30 and going to 5, but for this volume, because it's a bit longer, we're starting at 3, as you can tell, and going to 5. So here's hoping we get at least 50 pages. We might take a break halfway through. I am not sure. We're playing it by ear today. I'm having a little bit of stomach issues, but it's not a big deal. So I might have to take a break around halfway through, but it's fine. We may not. Who knows? We'll find out when we get there. Let's see. I feel like there's something I'm forgetting in the opening spiel that I go through to give people a chance to get the notification and hop on in if they would like to. Why do I feel like I'm forgetting something? Well, I mean, I'm usually always forgetting something, so this is not an unfamiliar feeling. I'm probably just tricking myself. Alright, let me get it set up so that I'm not looking at a bunch of versions of myself as I read, because that's distracting. Alrighty. We were just at, Fengshen and Muqing had just entered. So, Just then, Fengshen and Muqing stepped out from the back of the shrine, drawn by the summons. With weary disapproval, Fengshen said, "Your Highness, how did you find such a small Crown Prince shrine? Why did you send out a call from here?" He looked down and suddenly noticed that he'd almost stepped on the curled-up figure on the ground and blurted out, "The fuck is this kid doing here?" Muqing also looked down, inspecting the child closely. He immediately asked, "Your Highness, is this the child who ran for Mount Taisung 3 years ago?" Xie Lian shook his head. "I can't be certain. I don't know what his name was, nor what he would look like now." While the three chatted around the unsuspecting child, the boy turned. As he wiped his face, Xie Lian realized there was blood running down his nose and from the corner of his mouth. Xie Lian felt even more strongly that he couldn't just leave him like this. Why don't we have the child leave first? Xie Lian said. It's getting dark. This shrine isn't a good place to spend the night. Do you think he has nowhere else to go? Feng Shen wondered. If that's the case, then I'm afraid this is the only place where he could spend the night. He has a home, though the situation there might not be great, Xie Lian said. Even so, this shrine isn't any better. He has to leave so we can find him something to eat. He's also injured. Mu Qing spoke up. Your Highness, please excuse my frankness, but we don't have time to bother with these minor things right now. Did you call us here because you've made a decision? No heavenly official of the upper court would accept every prayer from every one of their devotees without exception. There were millions of followers in the world, and if heavenly officials had to attend to every single one, it would exhaust them all into early graves. This was why, every so often, they would turn a blind eye to minor or less impactful wishes and pretend they heard nothing to lessen the workload. Maybe it was due to Xie Lian's youth, how he was bursting with energy and passion, that he had yet to properly learn how to adapt to his priorities. I mean, yeah, he is bursting with energy and passion and youth and all that, but also, I feel like that's just Xie Lian, you know? After some thought, he walked toward the entrance of the tiny shrine, carrying the umbrella that was gifted to him earlier by those pedestrians on the street. Xie Lian slowly opened the umbrella. The falling raindrops pitter-pattered hard over its surface. The boy on the ground heard the noise and thought that someone had entered and shifted slightly, but he then seemed to realize he didn't care whether someone had come or not, and he lay back down again. Xie Lian placed the opened umbrella by the entrance. When the boy noticed that the sound persisted, he finally found it strange enough to rise to his feet and go take a look. There he found a red umbrella leaning... No. No. No, 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 no. It's been a page and a half. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. We're not. It's been I've been reading for 2 seconds. It's too early for this bullshit. What are we on? We're not even on page 60. We started on page 57. I'm on page 59. This you can't do this to me now. Who does this to me now? No. Fuck you. No. No, no, no. No. I'm shooting violently into denial. This is not happening. No, no. I just lost my place so hard. Where even am I? I don't know. I've just been rocketed off the face of the planet. Where even? There we are. It keeps hitting me in waves. Okay. Okay. Where was I? Where was I? I was reading. Okay, alright. Here we are. There, he found a red umbrella leaning on the ground under the rain, like a lonesome, blooming, crimson flower. He froze in surprise as I threw my book out the window. I've got a window right here. I could do it. Watching the boy rush forward and grab the umbrella, Mu Qing lectured, Your Highness, you've done more than enough. It'll complicate things needlessly. If you're too obvious and he finds out. Mu Qing getting absolutely clobbered by Apollo's gift of prophecy right now. Before Xie Lian could reply, the young boy rushed back in and shouted from behind them, Your Highness! The three gods almost jumped in surprise and turned their heads. Cradling the umbrella in his arms, the boy's eye was reddened. Sorry, I'm having a lot of things happening up here. The boy's eye was reddened and filled with emotion. He lifted his head and shouted to the clay statue, "Your Highness, is that you? Oh no, that's so sweet." Feng Shen was amazed at his deduction, and he didn't know that Xie Lian had helped the boy chase away his bullies and had even chucked a fruit at him. Little guy's kind of smart. He actually figured it out. Mu Qing, on the other hand, clearly suspected that something must have happened. He eyed Xie Lian. "If you're here, please, answer my one question," the boy begged. From his place high atop the altar, Xie Lian heard countless pleas of, "Please appear before me every day." When a sound becomes repetitive, it numbs the ear. Even so, hearing a plea like this, he still couldn't help but drop the matter at hand and perk up his ears. Beside him, Mu Qing cautioned, "Your Highness, leave it be." Xie Lian didn't speak. The young boy squeezed the umbrella tightly with both hands, gritting his teeth. "I'm suffering. Ooh, every day I want to die. Every day I want to kill everyone in this world and then myself. I'm living in agony." From a boy who couldn't be older than 13, such furious words probably sounded both laughable and pitiful. But hidden inside that tiny body was something explosive, something that sustained that roaring rage. Feng Shen frowned. What's wrong with him? Kill everyone in this world? Is that really something a kid would say? Oh, we've got art. Okay. "He's still young," Mu Qing replied flatly. "When he gets older, he'll know that whatever he's going through now isn't anything." I'm sorry, have you seen this kid with his bandage still wrapped around his head at age 13? After a pause, he looked at Xie Lian. "There are too many suffering in this world. Take Yong'an's drought, for example. Name one Yong'an citizen who has it better than him. There's no need to bother with this, Your Highness. Let's focus on our priorities." "Ruthless, but intellectually I understand." "Perhaps," Xie Lian said softly. "One person's suffering probably looked insignificant to another." Yeah, if you play the Suffering Olympics, which I guess they have to do in their line of work. The boy was still looking up at the statue. His eye was awfully red, yet there were no tears. With the umbrella in one hand, he reached out with the other and tugged on the clay statue's robes and continued to plead for answers. What should I live for in this world? What does it mean to live? Ooh, 13, asking the big questions. However, his questions were met by silence. There was not a soul to give him an answer. It seemed that the young boy had expected as much and slowly dropped his head. To his surprise, a voice from above suddenly broke through the silence. It's the fact. You know what it is? You know what it is at this point? Truly, at this point, it is the fact that Xie Lian is just doing this completely unaware of the ramifications of his actions. Like, he's just, and like, how would he know, obviously, but he's just something about, okay, I actually know what it is. It's the dramatic irony. It is such pure dramatic irony that is so layered and so queer that, like, I am sustained. I don't need, why would I this is legitimately some of the craziest, but some of the best dramatic irony I've ever been able to feast upon in my entire life. Let's try that again. To his surprise, a voice from above suddenly broke through the silence. "If you do not know how to live on anymore, then live for me." He know not what he do, but we do. And as a result, I mean, screw the book. I'm about to jump out the window. And like, I don't live in a 2-story house or anything, but we do have a crawl space. So that's kind of like a 10-foot drop or something. We're still elevated. That would hurt. And there's a bush outside. It wouldn't be pretty. Neither Feng Xin nor Mu Qing had actually expected him to answer, and such an answer, too. Their eyes widened. Your Highness. The young boy's head shot up, but there was no one there. There was only a soft, gentle voice coming from that clay statue. I have no answer to the question you asked. However, if you do not know the meaning of your life, then make me that meaning, and use me as your reason to live. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. I may as well show you the art at this point while I recover from this absolutely absurd ridiculousness. Look at that. Look at that monumental moment in a certain young boy's life. This is ridiculous. This is so Feng Xin and Mu Qing's faces looked like they were about to explode. And both reached out to smother Xie Lian's mouth, sputtering, "No more, Your Highness. You're breaking the rules. The rules." But before they could fully cover his mouth, Xie Lian managed one last shout. Oh. Thank you for your flower. It's beautiful. I like it very much. That was the end of the chapter. That was the couple of sentences on page 62, which really means it was just page 61. Plus there was a picture on page 60. So what? That was like 2-3 pages to start today? Okay. We are now on page 63, chapter 32, called Deficient Rain. The Rainmaster lends the rain hat. The boy was left completely and utterly gay. I mean, at this point, he's completely and utterly the queerest boy for this god. Right? Like, we all know. I mean, The boy was left completely and utterly stunned. Meanwhile, Feng Xin and Mu Qing both wished they could grow several more arms and legs to smother Xie Lian, and it was with great difficulty that they finally pulled him back. And yet Xie Lian effortlessly pushed him away, declaring, "All right, I'm done. I know I broke the rules, but if you just pretend you heard nothing, all will be well. As long as you guys don't say anything, no one will know. It's just this once. Don't say a word, do you hear me?" Mu Qing looked like he'd been forced to eat a sock. He shook his head, muttering, "I can't believe you, saying something like 'live on' for me, so unapologetically. You're really..." Xie Lian didn't think what he said was much of anything at first, but hearing Mu Qing, now it sounded like it was quite something indeed, and he flushed bright red. Feng Xin immediately turned stern. "Enough. His Highness already said not to speak of it, so why are you still talking about it?" Yet the corners of his own lips were twitching as he spoke. Xie Lian couldn't stand it anymore and defended himself. What I said clearly worked. Look." The boy sat in a daze for a long while, but when Xie Lian's voice didn't return, he rubbed hard at his face and reached for the offering plate on the altar. He held it in his arms and started eating the shriveled fruit and refreshments. He chewed and chewed vigorously, looking like a pitiful, vicious small animal. Xie Lian bent down to watch him, a smile spreading across his face. "You see," he said to the other two, "it worked. He refused to eat before, but now he is." "All right, fine, it worked, because you're a god," Mu Qing said. Right, it worked, because you're a god," Feng Xin said as well. Xie Lian straightened and grew serious once more. "Indeed, I am a god. I called you both over because I have come to a decision." In an instant, the relaxed atmosphere turned heavy again. What do you want us to do? Fengshen asked, while Muqing queried, are we still getting involved? We are. It's simple, Xie Lian said. There is not enough water in the kingdom of Xianlei, so we will go to the kingdoms outside Xianlei. Go to other kingdoms? Muqing asked, sounding doubtful. Won't they be too far? We'd need to borrow water-creating spiritual devices from some water god and impose on the territories of other heavenly officials. They might not be willing. Okay, so not much in the way of, foreign relations, I see. Of course, Xie Lian had considered this. I'm going to give it a shot. It's still better than doing nothing. You two stay and keep watching over Yong'an. Lend assistance to the worst affected areas, and I will return to the upper court. Any problem with that? No problem. I've got your back, Fengshen said. Muqing gave it some thought and asked, but what about all the prayers from the devotees at the Temple of the Crown Prince, Your Highness? I was getting to that, Xie Lian replied. Pick out the important ones and take care of them for me. The not-so-dire ones can wait. Muqing appeared rather reluctant, but still acknowledged the command. You're the Crown Prince, so we'll listen to you, but I'd advise not letting them wait too long. Xie Lian patted their shoulders. Fengshen and Muqing bowed, then departed, leaving only Xie Lian and the child in the small shrine. As Xie Lian exited the shrine, he took a brief glance back. However, he didn't stay a moment longer and rushed straight for the heavenly capital. Initially, that's what I forgot. That's what I forgot. My internet was looking a little, at the start of the stream, so I was going to give the general warning that if it dips out, it usually dips out for just a second and comes right back, and we usually don't miss anything more than like a sentence, right? So it's not a big deal. That's what I forgot. Oh, great. Now I get to find my place again. Oh, no, we're over here. Hang on. Almost there. Okay. As Xie Lian, actually, you guys are really good. Yeah, you guys are really good at having the last thing you heard. Oh, there we are. Initially, he had planned to pay a visit to any of the heavenly officials who controlled water, but strangely, they seemed to all be on leave and absent from their respective residences in the heavenly capital. Only the Rain Master, who didn't reside in the heavens, was on active duty. You think that might have something to do with the drought? I don't know, man. All the rain gods are like out to lunch. They're on a coffee break. That might be really wrong, but that seems like, one rain. Anyway. As Xie Lian hurried down the streets of the capital, he bumped into a black-clad female official carrying an armload of scrolls. She smiled. Your Highness, you're finally back. Nangong, perfect timing, Xie Lian said, then immediately asked, do you know where the Rain Master's residence is located? This black-clad woman was named Nangong Ji, and she was a low-ranking civil official from the middle court. Since Xie Lian's ascension, she was the one taking care of much of the bureaucratic grunt work and related errands. She was well informed about current events and handled cases adeptly, so Xie Lian thought highly of her. The construction of Lord Rainmaster's new place isn't complete yet, but a temporary residence is situated in the kingdom of Yuxi in the south. Nangong Ji, said. She gave him the address to the Rainmaster's residence, then inquired further, why are you looking for Lord Rainmaster? I mean, we need rain. Urgent business. Thanks for your help, Xie Lian said. He was about to leave, but turned back and cleared his throat, sounding embarrassed. Nangong, you're more familiar than I am with the heavenly officials of the upper court. Can you tell me if Lord Rainmaster likes anything in particular? When new heavenly officials ascended, the more astute ones would pay visits to the palaces of every official and greet them with gifts as a social salutation. This was pretty much an unspoken rule. However, Xie Lian had ascended too suddenly, and no one taught him when he first arrived. It was only afterward that the state preceptor reminded him, but by then it was already too late, and it would have only made things awkward. Also, to a crown prince like Xie Lian, it felt too much like backhanded bribery, and he didn't appreciate the practice. In the end, he decided to just go about things naturally, hoping for a chance to build relationships with the other officials through more genuine means. It was an admirable idea, like pretty much every idea that comes out of this boy's head. But now, as he turned back to it and proactively asked what a heavenly official would like, it sounded quite like he was about to bribe someone. He couldn't help but blush with shame, but he had no choice. The other gods who resided at the heavenly capital communicated through the spiritual communication array, which would have made negotiation much easier, but the Rainmaster did not communicate in this manner. And Xie Lian didn't want other gods to misunderstand his intentions, to think that he was looking to borrow spiritual devices for nothing. Nangongji immediately understood. Regrettably, I'm afraid I can't help your highness in this matter. Lord Rainmaster is quite low-key. I doubt there's anyone in the entire heavenly realm who knows the Lord's personal interests, myself included. Sorry. Xie Lian reddened. No worries, don't take it to heart, thanks. But if my lord needs to, it won't hurt to simply pay a visit, Nangongji added. By my understanding of Lord Rainmaster's temperament, you might still be granted an audience. Xie Lian thanked her again and followed her directions southward until he arrived at the temporary residence of the Rainmaster. It was a small village surrounded by green mountains and clear waters, a land of picturesque scenery, but Xie Lian had no mind to appreciate it. He crossed through the ridges of fields and finally saw a stone marker with the word rain engraved on it. Logically speaking, after passing the stone marker, he would be in the temporary domain of the Rainmaster, and those working within it should be the Rainmaster's subordinates. But as Xie Lian walked, he only saw lush green fields all around. In the fields there were oxen mooing, mills turning, assiduous farmers planting rice stalks, and beside the fields there was a small, crooked, thatched cottage. There was neither trace nor sign of divinity, and Xie Lian wondered if he'd gone in the wrong direction. Wasn't this simply a small, impoverished farming village? As he doubted himself, a black ox in a far field let out a long, lowing noise, and another. Then it stood back on its hind legs, and its forelegs stretched out in order to remove the plow from its own back. That strong, solid body narrowed, the long oxen snout shrank, and in the blink of an eye it had transformed from a sleek black ox into a farmer, stripped to the waist. The farmer was tall and strong, his muscles well defined, and the contours of his face hard. His nose had a polished iron nose ring hooked through it like that of an ox, and a long grass stalk hung from his lips. The other farmers witnessed this extraordinary transformation, but continued to work like it was nothing. Xie Lian concluded that no one here was mortal, and approached, raising his folded hands in courtesy. Fellow cultivator, may I inquire whether this is the temporary residence of Lord Rainmaster? The black ox farmer pointed to the field bank directly across and replied, Yeah, Lord Rainmaster lives there. Xie Lian looked around several times before confirming that the only thing in that pointed direction was indeed the thatched cottage. It looked like it would topple from a mere breeze, and it surely leaked on rainy days. Even his most shabby, decrepit shrines looked solider, and more respectable than that little cottage. Xie Lian was amazed. They said the Lord Rainmaster was of royal descent like himself, from the kingdom of Yuxi. It was for that very reason that he didn't bring any precious gems or rare treasures as a greeting gift, thinking perhaps that the Rainmaster felt the same way he did about those things, which was nothing. Why live in such destitution after ascension? Maybe it was another form of cultivation? Ooh. Okay. I know what we're about to learn. Mindful of his manners, Xie Lian thanked the farmer and approached the little cottage, calling with a loud, clear voice. Lord Rainmaster, please forgive this Prince of Shanlei for making an abrupt visit without prior notice. There was no response from within the cottage. The farmer ambled over, hauling the plow along after him. Oh? You're that crown prince who ascended at age 17? Regrettably, Xie Lian said. Nothing regrettable about it, it's just the truth, the farmer said, but Lord Rainmaster doesn't enjoy entertaining guests, and was injured recently, so I'm afraid you won't be received today. Xie Lian was disappointed at hearing this, but still wanted to keep trying. Then may I ask you to pass on a message for me? I have an urgent request. However, if Lord Rainmaster should feel inconvenienced by it, I won't persist. The farmer chuckled. No need to pass on any word. We all know why you're here. Feels bad, right? Having no water in Xie Lian. Xie Lian was taken aback. You know of Xie Lian's affairs, sir? Of course I know, the farmer said, and that's not limited to just those of us in this middle-of-nowhere mountain. Right now, who doesn't know that catastrophe is about to befall your kingdom of Xie Lian? You don't know anything about your own affairs, but everyone spectating understands what's really going on, and they're probably all enjoying the show. You're here to borrow the Rainmaster's spiritual device for disaster aid, right? Those were enlightening words. It was only then that Xie Lian realized those heavenly officials in the upper court weren't coincidentally all gone at the same time. They all knew what his intentions were and purposely shut their doors or left in advance to dodge him, to avoid being dragged into his mess. He sighed. Should I have paid everyone's palaces a visit at the beginning? Would that have made it easier to find someone willing to assist among my peers? It was a depressing thought. He responded in a small voice, that's right. If I am causing trouble for the Rainmaster, I will not pester any further. However, the farmer said, why won't you pester? Because it's shameful? This is about the survival of your kingdom. Shouldn't you pester us to death? Is it so hard to lower yourself and ask? Young people shouldn't be rattled so easily. Let me say something unpleasant. Should Lord Rainmaster help, it's on account of kindness. If not, it's on account of duty. Whether you'll be lent that device is based on the Lord's mood, so if you don't get what you want, don't bother complaining about it later. Xie Lian knew that what he said made sense, but the situation was so dire, and the farmer's tone so unfriendly, that a wave of anger rolled through him. He held his head higher and replied in an upright voice, I understand everything you are saying, and I would never complain behind anyone's back, so why must you make assumptions about how I'll react? I said I will not pester simply because I do not want to waste my time and cause trouble for Lord Rainmaster in the process. But if Lord Rainmaster would not feel inconvenienced, and all I need to do to borrow the spiritual device is be bothersome about it, then it would be nothing for me to offer up all 8,000 of my temples and kowtow 100 times. The farmer burst out laughing. You're angry? You have the temper of a child. Here. He tossed something over. Xie Lian raised his hand and caught a grass-colored bamboo hat. The very one that the farmer previously had on his back. What is this? Xie Lian asked. The thing you wanted to borrow. The thing you wanted to borrow? It's the thing he wanted to borrow. No, you know what this is? You know what this is. This is like the musical Wicked times 1,000. If you've seen the musical Wicked, you know what I'm talking about. But just in case you haven't, Wicked, very popular musical from the 2000s about kind of the origin stories of the Wicked Witch of the West from, Dorothy, Oz, all that. They go back and they explain all of the iconic features that makes up the Wicked Witch of the West and how she came to, have them and all of that jazz in the musical. That times 10,000. We're getting that for Xie Lian. We're getting that for Huachang. We're getting that through like 9 volumes of story instead of a 2.5 hour long musical. It's Wicked on crack is what it is. Powder cocaine is what that is. Sorry, again, so incensed, lost my place. Here we are. The thing you wanted to borrow, the farmer explained. Lord Rainmaster already asked me to pass this to you before you came. Use it carefully. If you break it, we won't forgive you. Xie Lian's eyes widened. Why? Didn't I already tell you? The farmer asked. The loan was based on the Lord's mood. Other heavenly officials won't help you, so Lord Rainmaster had to go against the flow. Whatever Lord Rainmaster wants to do shall be done. Thank you so much. Thank you, Xie Lian cried. Don't be too happy so soon, Your Highness, the farmer added. Lord Rainmaster may have ascended before you, but has fewer devotees and thus less power. And there are those recent injuries to consider. The loan of that thing is all you'll get. The rest is up to you. Distant waters cannot quench nearby thirsts. We've heard that before. The Rainmaster's hat can move rain, but not create water. There's not enough water in your Shanlei, so you must borrow from other kingdoms, and they may not be willing. Only the kingdom of Yushi has had rain in abundance in recent years, and it is rather wealthy in that aspect. However, there is a great distance to be crossed between the two kingdoms, and every use of that hat will drain an enormous amount of your spiritual power. No matter how much you possess, there will come a day that it runs dry. Wait. No. 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 I don't like this book anymore. Mm. Xie Lian was keenly aware of how difficult it was to lend one's spiritual device to some random person. He bowed deeply to the thatched cottage. I am profoundly grateful that the Lord Rainmaster would lend a helping hand. I will not forget this kindness. Should there be anything I can do to help in the future, pray the Lord Rainmaster does not hesitate to ask for me. Farewell. I'm still back on it. I'm still having about 20 different feelings. With the borrowed spirit, I'm fine. It's fine. With the With the borrowed spiritual device in hand, Xie Lian immediately found a lake in the south and ladled out a large portion of its water with the Rainmaster's hat. Crossing thousands of kilometers, he returned to Yong'an in Shanlei. He found the worst affected village, the Bay of Lang'er, and flipped the bamboo hat over above the clouds. Soon after, a short sprinkling of rain fell from the sky. Xie Lian jumped off the clouds and landed both feet on the ground. The half-dead villagers couldn't believe their eyes. Some rushed out of their homes to cheer under the rain, and others hurriedly brought out buckets of all sizes to collect water. Xie Lian sighed in relief at the sight of this, and he finally managed to smile. Just then he heard a voice call out from afar, "Your Highness!" He turned and saw Mu Qing appear from behind a tree, his face dark. Seeing his gloomy expression, Xie Lian knew something was wrong. "What is it? Did something happen?" That's the end of the chapter. So, chapter 33, I guess. We're now on page 73 for chapter 33. Closing the capital gates, survival of Yong'an barred. What? Okay. Your Highness, what took you so long? Mu Qing asked. Xie Lian was taken aback. Was I really gone that long? Traveling all over the heavens and earth, scooping up lake water, mounting clouds and making rain, all without care for day and night, Xie Lian hadn't realized just how much time had passed. It's been days, Mu Qing exclaimed. There's a mountain of backed up prayers from devotees at the temple of the Crown Prince. Just then, Xie Lian felt the rain fading and extended a hand. Did I not leave instructions for the two of you to handle the important ones first? Of course we handled what we could, Mu Qing replied, but there are too many prayers that we don't have the authority to manage. That's why I asked your Highness not to make them wait too long and to hurry back. As he finished speaking, the rain stopped. The rainstorm was much shorter than Xie Lian had expected, and he felt his heart sinking. As the clouds dispersed, the green bamboo hat came fluttering down, and Xie Lian caught it with both hands. But do you see the situation? I can't pull myself away from here either. Mu Qing frowned. Your Highness, did you manage to borrow the Rainmaster's spiritual device? Where did the water come from? From the kingdom of Yushi in the south. Xie Lian replied. That far? Muqing exclaimed. How much power did it take to move water just once? And if you're determined to keep watering Yong'an with these sparse storms, how will you keep up with your followers' prayers? Even if he hadn't said it aloud, Xie Lian understood. He was a martial god, and the devotees to the temple of the crown prince were his foundation, the source of his spiritual power. His actions now were essentially abandoning that foundation, and if he wasn't careful, both sides would suffer. But what else could he do? I know, Xie Lian said, but if things go on like this and a riot breaks out in Yong'an, the temple of the crown prince will be affected sooner or later. That's already happened, Muqing exclaimed. Xie Lian was shocked. What? At that, Xie Lian rushed back to the imperial capital of Shanlei. When he arrived at the Grand Avenue of Divine Might, a band of imperial soldiers clad in armor and wielding sharp weapons were marching a line of detained men down the road. The prisoners were unkempt, with their hands and head locked in... can't pronounce that word. Can't pronounce it. My mouth won't do it. Can't even really guess at the sound. Cangues. There's a footnote about them, and it says it's a flat board, usually made of wood, that was secured around the neck and sometimes hands of people as a form of corporal punishment or public humiliation. Gotcha. Hearing his voice, Feng Xin hurried over. Your Highness, they're all people of Yong'an. There were dozens of men in that line, all tall and gaunt, their skin tanned and dark from the sun. Behind the soldiers trailed several old men and a number of stricken women and children. The ones following behind are as well? Xie Lian questioned. All of them, Muqing confirmed. Over the past several months, at the height of the drought, Yong'an residents uprooted their lives and fled to the east in droves. When it was only a dozen people, it wasn't obvious, but the flow kept coming, and by now there were more than 500 of them. When a massive, dense crowd like that gathered, it became quite the spectacle. The people of Yong'an were strangers to this land, with nothing to their names, and the moment they opened their mouths, their dialects gave them away, so when they arrived at this strange, bustling city, they naturally stuck together for comfort. After searching all over, they finally found an uninhabited green meadow within the imperial capital. Overjoyed, they built sheds and huts as temporary shelters. Unfortunately, although the field was uninhabited, it was very dear to those of the imperial capital. The culture of Shanlei was quite indulgent, and residents of the imperial capital were leaders in that lifestyle. Citizens would gather at that field to stroll, dance, sing poetry, paint, practice the art of the sword, and so on. Yong'an, on the other hand, had always been poor, so the temperament and culture of the citizens of this western land were completely opposite to those of the east. Because of this, citizens of the imperial capital often believed that they had the purest Shanlei blood. And now their elegant city had been overtaken by a large number of refugees, who filled the air with their strange smells and sounds, the constant disruption of laundry and campfires, the stench of stewing herbs and leftovers and sweat, the unending weeping. It made many nearby residents recoil with disgust, and their complaints were endless. A little too real. Some of the elder Yong'an leaders understood their predicament and wanted to move elsewhere, yet the imperial capital was already heavily populated. No matter where they went, it was crowded with people, and there wasn't anywhere else that they could settle so many. Furthermore, they had wounded people, sick people, old folks, and children, which made it infeasible to move frequently. They had no choice but to shamelessly yet cautiously cling to that meadow. As much as it displeased the people of the imperial capital, the refugees were still citizens of the same country. In light of the ongoing disaster, they tolerated the stranger's presence. Xie Lian had heard up to that point in the situation report when the band of soldiers arrived at the mouth of the marketplace with the Yong'an men in tow. The soldiers bellowed, "Kneel!" Every one of the men looked indignant, but with blades at their throats, they had no choice but to kneel. When the crowd of capital citizens saw the men drop to their knees, some sighed, but others clearly felt vindicated. According to your report, both sides have tolerated each other thus far, so what happened today? Before Feng Xin or Muqing could answer, a woman started wailing and crying from the crowd. You barbaric thieves, never mind your sticky fingers. You beat my husband so badly that he can't get up. If he doesn't recover, I'll make you pay. Next to her, a number of people rushed to comfort her, and some pointed their fingers in reproach. Don't you know how to behave when you're living in other people's territory? Yeah, you're guests in our home, but you've made yourselves real comfortable, haven't you? Thieves? One of the bound young men finally couldn't take it anymore. We already told you we didn't steal anything, he argued. We didn't throw the first punch either. Besides, we've got wounded people on our side too. Stop talking, a Yungan elder admonished him. The young man shut his mouth angrily. A dog went missing in the imperial capital, Feng Xin explained. There was an incident earlier where a Yungan child stole and ate someone's duck out of extreme hunger, so there were rumors that the dog was stolen and eaten by the Yungan refugees too. A mob went to interrogate and then started a brawl when the interrogation went south. Xie Lian was incredulous. A riot over a dog? And they detained this many people? Yes, over a dog, Feng Xin said. It blew up this badly because both sides have been putting up with each other for too long. Even petty things can become a big deal. Both sides swear that the other side started it and that it's the other's fault, and this nonsensical scuffle just got bigger and bigger. Violent rioters shall see severe punishment, a high-ranking soldier announced. You are all sentenced to the word my mouth really can't figure out how to pronounce. For public condemnation, any further crimes are forbidden. After the sentencing, he stood down, and the next second, some of the crowd started hurling lettuce leaves and rotten eggs at the men of Yungan. The old men who trailed behind started bowing to the crowd, crying for mercy. We apologize, everyone, we apologize. Please have mercy. Xie Lian thought this whole thing was absolutely absurd, making a mountain out of a molehill, but he could also understand the feelings on both sides. So did they really steal anything? Did they find that dog? Feng Xin shook his head. Who knows? If the bones were stripped and thrown away, who could prove anything? But judging by their faces, I don't think they did it. But of course, the soldiers of the imperial capital would favor the capital's citizens when handing down their judgment. Whether anything had been stolen or not, there had been a riot, and so the fault must lie with those from Yungan. Furthermore, while the men of the imperial capital loved to strut around, they weren't as tough as the men of Yungan. They must have been utterly humiliated in that brawl, and that complete loss of face only created a greater feud between the two groups. Xie Lian shook his head. As his gaze swept over the crowd, he suddenly noticed a familiar-looking young man at the middle of that row of Yungan prisoners, with his head hung low. It was that man from the woods, Lang Ying. Xie Lian was stunned. Just then, someone nearby complained. It seems like more and more of these Yungan people have been showing up in the past few months, and now they've started to pick fights? I'm still hung up on Lang Ying being there. Head hung low. Yungan prisoner. Yeah. And now they've started to pick fights? They're not all coming here, are they? A man who appeared to be a merchant gestured wildly. His Majesty the King won't allow it. My house was robbed by Yungan thieves just the other day. If they all came here, there'd be hell. Lan Ying had kept his head low all this time, letting the groceries hit him freely, but at those words, he suddenly looked up. Did you see it? The merchant hadn't expected a response, and replied without thinking, What? Yungan thieves robbing your house. Did you see them with your own eyes? I didn't see them myself, but it's always been peaceful here before. I was only robbed after you all showed up. So how can you say it has nothing to do with you? The merchant argued. Lan Ying nodded. I get it. Before we came here, your people were the ones stealing, but once we arrived, we became the thieves. A rotten persimmon came flying at him before he could finish and smashed into the side of his mouth, looking like he'd vomited a splatter of blood. The merchant burst out laughing, and Lang Ying's eyes dimmed. He closed his mouth and stopped talking. Xie Lian dissolved the sharp rocks that were thrown at the young men, ensuring that they wouldn't be severely injured. This public humiliation continued until evening, and only after the onlooking citizens finally dispersed did the soldiers decide it was enough. Only then did they unlock the thing that I can't pronounce and warn the men not to cause any more trouble. Otherwise, they'd be severely punished, and so on and so on. The elders bowed deeply over and over with apologetic smiles, promising to never violate the rules again. But Lang Ying, looking apathetic, walked away all alone. Oh, it happened again. I almost had it. Damn it. Xie Lian watched that lone figure depart, then caught the right moment to appear in a flash from behind a tree and block his path. The moment he appeared, the young man's eyes sharpened, and in that instant it looked like he was going to choke Xie Lian dead. He took a second to process who was standing before him and withdrew the hand that was so ready to attack. It's you. Xie Lian had transformed back into the form of that young cultivator. Lang Ying had almost managed to seize him, which startled Xie Lian even as he thought, this man is a little impressive. I gave you that pearl, he said, so why didn't you take it back to Yong'an? Lang Ying regarded him. My son is here. I'm here too. After a brief pause, he took the coral pearl from his belt. Do you want it back? Here. The hand he held out still had marks from the unpronounceable thing. After a moment of silence, Xie Lian didn't take it. Go back. It rained at the Bay of Lang'er today. He pointed to the sky. Tomorrow there will be rain again, I promise. It's certain to be so. But Lang Ying shook his head. It doesn't matter if it rains or not, there's no going back. Watching his back as he walked away, Xie Lian was left dumbfounded. He only felt endless frustration. Before he ascended, it was like he hadn't a cloud of worry in his skies. He could do whatever he wanted. Who could have known that after ascension he would suddenly be surrounded by incessant worries, both the worries of others and his own? Had it always been this hard to get something done? Oh, sweetie. He had never felt so lacking, so powerless. Xie Lian sighed and turned to leave as well. There was a mountain of prayers waiting to be addressed by him at the temple of the Crown Prince. Yet he wasn't the most troubled of all. That title went to the king, for the worries of the king of Shanlei had become reality. Those 500-some Yong'an refugees were only the beginning. With the borrowed Rainmaster's hat in hand, Xie Lian ran unceasingly back and forth between the north and south, creating rain by his own power. Every little rainstorm used up an immense amount of spiritual power and 5 to 6 days' worth of his time. There may not have been another god besides him who could keep up such a draining duty, besides Junwu, of course. However, the Heavenly Emperor ruled over a far vaster land than he, and the number of devotees and domains he attended to was significantly greater than Shanlei. How could Xie Lian possibly distract Junwu by asking for his help? And still, each rainstorm could only wet a small area of Yong'an and lasted but a short while. Even if they caused some relief, they couldn't fix the root of the problem. After a month of this, the people of Yong'an began their exodus to the east in droves. Before it was groups of dozens at a time. Now it was hundreds, thousands, massive hordes that flocked together, streaming like a river. After another month, the king of Shanlei issued a new decree. Due to the endless disputes and incessant scuffles of recent months, for the sake of peace within the imperial capital, all Yong'an refugees are to leave the city immediately. Every refugee shall be given a set travel fund to assist in their settlement elsewhere. And with that, the grand gates to the imperial capital of Shanlei closed before the massive, teeming horde of Yong'an refugees. Open the gates! Let us in! The soldiers retreated into the city and pushed the 1,000-ton gates shut. The people who had been driven out by the soldiers went rushing back toward the entrance like a tide of black water to pound on the massive doors. Atop the towers, the soldiers roared, "Get away! Leave! Collect your travel fund and head east! Don't mill around!" But the Yong'an refugees had turned their backs on their homes, fled their lands, and arrived at the closest city, the imperial capital. With the gates to the city now closed to them, if they wanted to survive, they would have to walk an even longer distance around its perimeter to cities further east. The journey to the imperial capital had already been massively perilous, with countless injured or dead. How could they possibly have any more energy to continue on? Even with the travel funds, rations, and water, how many more days could they endure on the road? Their faces were ashen. Some dragged their household's goods behind them, some carried babies on their backs, some carried stretchers. Some held each other up, some could stand no more and lay or sat on the ground. Acres and acres of them stayed there, outside the city walls. Some younger men still had the energy to be enraged, and they pounded the doors with their fists as they yelled, "You can't do this! You've written off our lives! We're all citizens of Shanlei. You can't just kill us off like this!" One of the men yelled until his voice was hoarse. "You can kick us out, that's fine. I won't stay. But at least take my wife and children, please." They were like ants trying to shake a tree. The city gates remained unmoved. Xie Lian stood on top of the tower, white robes flapping in the wind, and he crossed the parapet to look down below. Outside the imperial capital were endless heads, black and squirming, dense and tightly knit, very much like the swarms of ants he used to see in the imperial gardens when he played there in his younger years. Back then, he'd peered at them curiously and surreptitiously extended a finger to poke at them, but immediately an attendant had cried out, "Your Highness, those things are dirty. You can't touch. Don't touch." Then she rushed over, skirt lifted, and squashed all the ants under her foot. When those ants were alive, there was hardly anything worth looking at in their dense, roiling swarm. Once they were squashed into mush, there was even less to look at. Within the capital walls, lights twinkled magnificently in myriads of homes, and the sound of music wafted in the air. This one city wall separated two completely different worlds. It wasn't just that new Yang'an refugees were being refused, but even the ones that were already settled in the city had been expelled. It was harsh, but with the mounting friction between the Yang'an refugees and the capital residents in recent months, Xie Lian could somewhat understand. If they allowed any Yang'an citizen to remain inside the city walls, they could collude with those outside the walls and cause havoc. However, there was one area he felt should be up for negotiation. He said absently, "Why must the women and the vulnerable be expelled too? There are some who can't walk much further." Feng Xin and Mu Qing stood right behind him. "If they must be expelled, they must all be expelled," Mu Qing replied. "Everyone must be treated equally. There mustn't be any favoritism, lest people be provoked into asking, 'Why can they stay when I can't?'" "You think too much," Feng Xin commented. "There are absolutely people who would think like that," Mu Qing said flatly. "Besides, if the wives and children remain, then the men won't want to go far. They'll return sooner or later. To keep people in the city is to keep future problems." The Yang'an refugees refused to leave, so the soldiers on the towers couldn't leave either. "Suit yourselves." The king himself gave the command, so did they think just sitting there loitering would do anything? They might be able to hang around for a day or two, but not a month or two, or a year or two, or so the soldiers and residents of the imperial capital believed. Some Yang'an refugees hopelessly accepted their fate and decided to gamble on traveling further eastward, but their numbers were few. Most still sat stubbornly by the city gates, hoping the imperial capital would open its doors to them, or at the very least give them somewhere to rest before they journeyed onwards. Newly arrived refugees were disappointed to see the city gates firmly shut, but when they saw so many waiting there, they joined the masses. Several days later, the crowd gathered outside the city gates was still only growing. Tens of thousands of people had evidently decided to settle there, and they built impressive rows of temporary shelters. They had the rations and water given by the king to sustain themselves, but the people were almost at their limit. That limit was breached on the 5th day. I'm nervous. I'm nervous. Bam. This isn't, I'm high key. I'm panicking. This is so bad. Over that time, Xie Lian had divided each day into 3. 1/3 dedicated to the devotees at the Temple of the Crown Prince, 1/3 for moving water and creating rain, and 1/3 for caring for the Yang'an citizens outside the city walls. But even with Feng Xin and Mu Qing helping, Xie Lian still felt the burden of these responsibilities. The spirit was willing, but the flesh was weak. By coincidence, it happened during a time when Xie Lian wasn't standing guard outside the city walls. Under the scorching sun, a shriek was suddenly heard outside the gates. The cry came from a couple cradling their child in their arms. Many went over to see. What's wrong with the child? Hungry? Thirsty? And soon a shout. Everyone come share some water here. This kid's not looking good. The woman sobbed as she gave water to her red-faced child, but the child just vomited it back up. I don't know what's wrong, the father said. He's sick. A doctor. We need a doctor. Carrying his son, he ran to the gates and started slapping on the doors. Open up! Help! Someone's dying! My son is dying! It was only natural that the soldiers inside didn't dare to open the gates. Whether or not someone was actually dying, there were tens of thousands outside. If they opened the gates up, there'd be no closing them. Instead, they reported to the officers higher up. The weather had been hot over the past few days, and the heat was making the soldiers standing watch cranky. Give him some food and water, the officer said dismissively. They hung food and water on a rope and lowered it down. Thank you, my lords and brothers, but we don't want food and water. Can you help us find a doctor? The man pleaded. This made things difficult. They couldn't let him in to find a doctor, and they certainly couldn't lower a doctor from the city walls. Heavens knew what those starving refugees might do once the doctor got outside. Forget it, the high-ranking officers replied. Ignore them, they're not dying. If they ask again, tell them their message has been sent to the king for a response. Over recent weeks, the king had been deeply troubled by the Yong'an issue and was easily angered, so of course no one would actually dare to bother him with such a trivial matter. The soldiers responded as directed, and that Yong'an man, feeling greatly relieved, thanked him profusely, thanked his majesty, and knelt to kowtow multiple times. Yet hours upon hours passed. Shadows from the scorching sun moved from one end of the earth to the other, and the requested doctor still hadn't appeared as the child in their arms got hotter and hotter. The couple cradled their child in their arms that trembled nonstop. The man was covered in cold sweat, mumbling, Is anyone coming? Is anyone opening the gates for me? At last, they couldn't wait any longer and yelled to the towers, Officers! My apologies, but I need to ask, where's the doctor? A soldier responded, We're waiting for a formal response from the king. Just wait a while longer. Some citizens below couldn't sit still anymore. They said that 4 hours ago. Why isn't there a response yet? The soldiers heeded their superior's command and ignored them after that. The crowd surrounding the walls was furious, forlorn, and distressed. They surrounded the child and began to speculate. Did they actually pass on the message to His Majesty? They're not lying to us, are they? The father of that child couldn't wait any longer. He steeled himself, tied the child to his back, and turned to his wife to say a few last words. The woman removed a protection charm from around her neck and put it around her husband's. Then the man ran toward the city wall to try to scale it. The city wall was smooth, built to make climbing difficult. He grabbed at it a few times, but didn't make any progress. The rest of the men called out, Let us help, and pushed him up. A crowd of over a dozen men stacked themselves into a human pyramid and helped bring him higher. From the top, the man managed to grab onto the rope that had been used to lower water and food, and used it to continue his climb. At the bottom, tens of thousands watched anxiously, not daring to cheer for him, scared they might be discovered. The soldiers on top of the towers had been there for many days, and the Yong'an refugees hadn't started anything, so they were fairly lax on their watch. It wasn't until the man had reached the halfway point that they noticed that someone was scaling the wall. What are you doing? They barked. No climbing. Climbers will be killed without mercy. Do you hear me? Climbers will be killed without mercy. Faced with such a threat, the man shouted back, I don't have any ill intentions. I just want to bring my child to the doctor. I won't do anything else. He kept climbing as he called out. One of the superior officers was just having his meal, and upon hearing of this, he became vexed to the extreme. If that man were to scale the wall safely, wouldn't countless more Yong'an refugees follow his example and attempt the same? He had to be stopped. Thus, he strode out and shouted down the parapet, Do you not value your life? Go back down this instant. If you don't, you'll be sorry. But the man had already climbed high, past halfway, and with just one more push he'd reach the top. Naturally, he wouldn't stop now. Never in his life had that superior officer been disobeyed like this. His word was law. Those who disobeyed him were easy enough to take care of, however. He approached the parapet, pulled his sword, and struck. The rope snapped in two. The man plunged downward, snapped rope in hand. Awash in the scream of thousands, he crashed heavily on the hard ground before the city gates. That was the moment Xie Lian arrived. The man had fallen on his back, and on his back was his child. And the child was crushed into ground meat, splattering blood for dozens of meters. The man's neck was broken, his eyes bulging out of his skull. Around his twisted neck there dangled a charm with the words Shan Lei embroidered in golden thread, a protection charm from the temple of the Crown Prince. Right before he had started to climb, the man and his wife both clutched that protection charm in their hands and silently prayed for the blessings of His Highness the Crown Prince. Xie Lian had heard their voices and rushed over. But he was not a hero from the legends written in books. He couldn't appear right before the executioner dropped the axe every single time to save lives menaced by the blade. The woman didn't even have the courage to flip her husband's dead body to check on the condition of her son. She covered her face and screamed, and without looking, she made a crazed dash forward to bash her head into the wall. Crack, and she dropped on the spot, her body limp. Right before Xie Lian's eyes, in the flash of a second, 3 dead bodies were sprawled before the city gates of the royal capital. He hadn't even had the time to react before the crowd outside the city gates was whipped into a frenzy, unable to hold back any longer. Dead! A family of 3, all dead, someone yelled. Look, that's the good old officer working for His Majesty. He won't save us, but he sure will kill us. You won't let us in, but you won't let anyone out either. So what were we supposed to do? 3 bloody lives are on your hands. You said to expel all the Yunnan refugees from the imperial capital, but how come I don't see any of the rich ones out? Oh. Ooh. You said to expel all Yunnan refugees from the imperial capital, but how come I don't see any of the rich ones out here? So it's only the poor and powerless that deserve to die? I can see through you. I can't stand it anymore. I just can't. Year after year, we paid our taxes, but now that there's a disaster, where did all that money go? Did all the money go to parasites and building more temples for your son? Instead of aid for disaster victims? Just a meager bit of food to shut us up. What do you take us for? Useless king. Incompetent king. The soldiers on the towers yelled down at the crowd for them to stop, but the superior officer had seen much in his lifetime and didn't take any of this seriously. Yet the situation was spiraling out of control. Thousands and tens of thousands pushed furiously against the gates, some even using their own heads and bodies as battering rams, and this time it wasn't mere ants on trees. The gates moved. In fact, the entire city wall and its towers shook faintly. Xie Lian had never witnessed anything like this in his life. All the people he'd ever met had been kind, peaceful, happy, satisfied, and endearing, and moneyed to a certain extent, comfortable, tended to. taken care of. Those twisted faces, crying and screaming, forced him to enter a completely foreign world, and he couldn't help but feel chilled to his very bones. Even against the most horrifying ghosts and demons, he had never felt this way. Just then, there was an angry roar from above. He whipped his head around and saw a tall, gaunt figure choking the officer who had cut the rope and caused the 3 deaths outside the city walls. With a loud, clear crack, the officer's neck was snapped. The other soldiers had no idea how that man had suddenly appeared. Pale with shock, they rushed forward to surround him, brandishing their swords. "Who are you? How did you get up here?" Xie Lian immediately noticed the man's hands. The flesh was ripped to bits and smeared with blood. This man had scaled that smooth wall with only his bare hands. When the figure turned around, he saw that it was Lang Ying. Lang Ying was calm and collected, even when surrounded by soldiers. He crossed the parapet and threw the corpse of the officer down. Then he jumped off, using the corpse as a stepping stone to break his fall. The moment he jumped, he looked straight at Xie Lian. But the man wasn't truly looking at Xie Lian. Instead, he looked right through him to gaze at the imperial palace that towered at the center of the capital. From that day onward, all of the kingdom of Shanlei was thrown into chaos. Fuck, dude. Who the... Okay. Alright. Y'all be the judge, since I obviously don't know. As a reader, as like a first-time reader, am I supposed to have made the Lang Ying connection and my brain is just ridiculous and ADD and unreliable and I haven't made it yet when I should have? Or otherwise? Because if I should have made the connection by now, as a reader, then I would like to know. But if it's kind of up in the air, then I'll save it for whenever I fucking figure it out. Oh, okay, so it's yeah, it's not obvious, but it's not a secret or a spoiler either. Okay. Oh, wow. Blue turnips didn't until the second time they read it. Oh, okay, alright. Alright, okay. Then we'll keep going. Alrighty, I'm so curious. I mean, I'm sure it's probably not even, especially according to some of the comments, it's like not even quite that big of a deal. I'm just like curious though. Alright. Page 91. That was the end of a chapter. I don't know if I did not say that. That was the end of a chapter. We are now on page 91 for chapter 34, which is called Shanlei in Chaos. Crown Prince returns to the mortal realm. Why is that giving me the first time he descended vibes, you know? Like the first time he was kicked out. That's just where I figure I'm go. I should probably just read. All right. Pardon me. For displaced disaster victims, like those from Yang'an, to pick a fight against the Imperial Army was a losing battle, a gross overestimation of their own strength. Yet cornered people often possessed the courage to court ruin and fight a losing battle. After that riot, the tens of thousands of Yunnan refugees finally left the city gates and rebuilt their temporary camps some distance away. Still, they stubbornly refused to leave. They could die on the road if they kept going, but if staying was also death, what was the difference? Using the rations and water the king had distributed, supplementing them with bark, wild herbs, plant roots, critters, and insects, and topping it all off with resentment and loathing, those people possessed an unimaginably persistent will to live and relentlessly persevered. After a few days, they managed to assemble a few thousand men and returned for a fight, wielding hoes, rakes, rocks, and branches. Although their clash was a mess, an utter defeat, with over half of those few thousand dead, it wasn't fruitless. Lang Ying made it into a tower and returned hauling several large bags of grain and bundles of real weapons. There may have been serious casualties, but that just created a will to fight to the death among the people. Their nature was closer to that of bandits now. They raided once, twice, thrice. The soldiers of Shanlei soon discovered that the tactics of those bandits were rapidly improving. The initially inexperienced rioters gradually got the hang of things, and every time they attacked, they were more difficult to deal with than the last. The number who returned to camp alive increased with every attempt. There were also endless waves of new refugees joining the cause after hearing the news, and the group grew significantly in size. How to best deal with those bandits became the hottest topic for debate within the kingdom of Shanlei, and after 5 or 6 such ridiculous guerrilla attacks, Xie Lian could no longer sit still on the parapet and simply watch from the sidelines. He hadn't reported to the heavens in a long time, but this time, when he arrived at the heavenly capital, he dashed straight to the palace of divine might without a word. When he barged in, Junwu was seated on his throne. A group of heavenly officials seemed to be discussing an important matter and were bowing to receive his command. In the past, Xie Lian would have chosen a different day to pay this visit, but at the moment he had no time to spare. He cut right in. "My lord, I'm returning to the mortal realm." The heavenly officials were startled. They immediately covered their mouths, keeping silent, not wanting to show any kind of reaction. Junwu looked at him knowingly for a moment, then rose from his throne to speak to him gently. "Shanlei, I have an idea of what is happening, but you must remain calm." "My lord, I didn't come here to request permission. I came here to inform you," Xie Lian said. "My people are currently mired in the depths of hell, so please forgive me if I cannot remain calm." "The world has its own destiny," Junwu said. "Do you not realize that if you descend and appear before mortals, it will be a violation of heavenly law?" "If it's a violation, then so be it," Xie Lian cried. At this, the faces of the heavenly officials changed color. Never had a heavenly official dared to speak such words with so much gusto and so unapologetically. No matter how highly Junwu regarded this young, early ascended prince of Shanlei, it was still an act of great audacity. A moment later, Xie Lian bowed. "Pray, my lord, let me go this once. Just give me a little time. Since fighting has started, casualties are unavoidable, but if I can stop this and reduce the number of dead, minimize the conflict, then after the war ends, I will return willingly to repent, and my lord can sentence me as he sees fit. Whether I should be sealed under a mountain for 100 years, 1,000 years, 100,000 years, I will not regret it." After having his say, he remained in that bowing posture and stood down, leaving the great hall. "Shanlei," Junwu called. Xie Lian paused in his step. Junwu gazed at him, then sighed. "You cannot save everyone." Xie Lian slowly straightened up. "I won't know until I've tried. Even if the heavens say I must die, if that sword doesn't pierce my heart and nail me dead to the ground, then I am still alive, and I will struggle till my last breath." Returning to the mortal realm in solid form was unlike all the previous times he'd descended. Xie Lian felt like something had been abandoned. He felt light, and at the same time heavy. His first action was to return to the palace at once. The king and the queen were in the imperial study, whispering to each other, their faces grave and exhausted. Xie Lian approached the door nervously at first, but then he calmed himself, raised the curtain, and walked in. Father. The king and queen both looked back at the same time in shock. It was the queen who stood up first, crying joyously, "My son!" She extended both her hands and came forward to welcome him. Xie Lian caught her arms, accepting the gesture, but before the smiles went away, he saw the king's expression growing darker. "Why have you descended?" the king demanded. Xie Lian's smile froze. Before, when he heard his parents talk about him behind his back, Xie Lian had thought that his father might miss him, and wasn't as biased against him as it always seemed. He had thought that the king would show at least some degree of pleasure in seeing his return, and that he would surely soften his attitude. How could he expect that the king would react this way, so full of scorn? Xie Lian's own temper flared. "Why have I descended? Isn't it all because of you?" he replied sharply. "Shouldn't you ask yourself whether you bear responsibility for the situation with young An coming to this?" The king's face completely changed, and he countered harshly. "My responsibility? Is that something you can say to me?" His fury made him forget his royal plurals, and the queen teared up. "The situation is already as bad as can be, so why are you two arguing?" "We're not arguing," Xie Lian said. "We're talking about basic logic. Even if you are the king and my father, if you are the one responsible, why can't I say anything? Why didn't you work harder on disaster relief? If the aid money was completely swallowed by government checkpoints, why didn't you punish the corrupt officials? If you were fierce like thunder and fast like lightning, jailing them all with no exceptions, then would there still be so many parasites who dare to steal? Wouldn't things be better than they are now?" Veins popped on the king's forehead, and he banged on his bureau desk. "Quiet! Do you think the royal treasury is a bottomless well that can fix any leaking hole? Jail them all. If it were that easy, if by just one order from this king it'd work fast like lightning, fierce as thunder, then why has history never seen a dynasty untouched by corruption? What logic do you know? You ignorant child, you dare speak politics with me." "Fine," Xie Lian acquiesced. "I don't understand. But even if the imperial capital had no room for the victims to settle and their expulsion was inevitable, why not provide more for them? Why not appease them properly and have an army escort them on their journey eastward?" The king's eyes bulged with rage, and he pointed to the sky. "Be gone! Get out of here! Get back to the heavens! Just looking at you annoys me. Don't ever appear here again." Xie Lian had descended with a heart full of fervor, yet the reunion with his parents ended with his father yelling and sending him back up to the heavens. Without a word, Xie Lian gave a curt bow and stood down to leave the imperial study. The queen chased after him as he left and pulled him to a stop. "My son!" "Mother, don't worry," Xie Lian said gently. "I'm just going to walk around the imperial capital to check on the situation." The queen shook her head. "My son, I don't understand these political matters, but I understand your father. Throughout the years, I've seen how he is a king. You can think from the bottom of your heart that he isn't competent, and sometimes I think the same, even if I don't say it out loud. But you can't say that to his face. He's your father, after all. It's devastating to hear you say that he's been neglectful." Xie Lian opened and closed his mouth. The queen added, "You might have been the crown prince, but you have never been king. Ruling a nation is different from cultivating. When you first entered the royal holy temple, the state preceptor said cultivation only concerns the heart. Isn't that right?" Xie Lian nodded slowly, and the queen clutched his hands. "But there are times in this world when just having heart isn't enough. You must be capable, too, and not just you, but your subordinates as well. They must match you in ability and also share your heart." Xie Lian remained silent. After a moment, he asked, "Is the royal treasury suffering? I don't need temples. Tell them to stop building so many for me. Those golden statues can go." "My child," the queen replied helplessly, "of course your father's bias is showing a little in building temples. He wanted to give you the best and to make you look impressive in the heavens. But do you know just how many of those 8,000 temples were actually built by your father? You don't know, do you? Xie Lian really didn't know, and he pondered briefly. Half? If your father really used funds from the royal treasury to build 4,000 temples, we wouldn't need to wait for the Yunnan refugees to start anything. The imperial capital would revolt first, the queen said. So if the royal treasury is empty, where do you think all that money came from? Your father built maybe 20 temples, and others followed suit. Masses of them wanting to build to curry his favor, to curry your favor. Is that counted among your father's failures too? Xie Lian was stumped. The queen said softly, your father isn't the greatest king, but he's done his best. Only in this world, simply doing your best isn't good enough. Oh, Mom dropping a lot of truth bombs right now. After a pause, she added, right now, you feel sympathy for those Yunnan refugees, so you blame your father. But they're all his people. Do you think we're the ones bullying them? In truth, halfway through her words, the enraged voice of the king echoed from the study. What are you doing telling him so many useless things? Make him leave and go back to the heavens. The queen turned back to him and sighed. My son, don't descend for this. Go back. After leaving the palace, Xie Lian wandered down an alleyway near the Grand Avenue of Divine Might. As he walked, Feng Xin and Mu Qing appeared in a rush. The moment Mu Qing approached, he asked in disbelief, Your Highness, you requested to descend to the mortal realm? You spoke to the Heavenly Emperor? Yes, Xie Lian answered. Why didn't you tell me first? Mu Qing demanded. What do you mean? Feng Xin asked, puzzled. When he wants to do something, does His Highness have to report to anyone? Mu Qing seemed to be losing it. Why shouldn't he? We're his subordinates, and right now we're all tied together. His every action affects us. So is there something wrong with me wanting to know his plans? Oh, it's all coming together. Uh-huh. We'd have to follow His Highness no matter what he does. Heaven or earth, he goes his own way. So what are you afraid of? Feng Xin said. You... Mu Qing cut himself off in frustration. I'm not afraid. I am only... Xie Lian waved. Enough! Stop arguing. Feng Xin and Mu Qing quieted immediately. Just then, a crowd of demonstrators paraded down the main street in a long line, thousands of citizens hollering, There will be no peace in the kingdom until Yunnan is exterminated. They've gone too far. They've created too much disorder. They're a cancer. The people of Xianlei had never been so aggressive about anything, nor had they ever engaged in such a roaring protest. Xie Lian couldn't help but think something was amiss. Feng Xin, on the other hand, frowned. How come there's a woman in there? Sure enough, at the forefront of that crowd marched a young woman. She was slender, her skin snow white, her eyes bright and black, her cheeks flushed, not from shyness but from rage, an eye-catching sight. By then, Mu Qing had calmed himself down. His Highness doesn't recognize her? He asked coldly. No, Xie Lian replied. Feng Xin knitted his brows. She looks a bit familiar. She's one of the catalysts, Mu Qing said. What catalysts? Xie Lian asked. The catalyst for this standoff, Mu Qing replied. Before, when there were more and more Yunnan refugees surging into the capital, some wouldn't quietly mind their own business and went around causing trouble. The court was discussing the matter of expulsion, and word of it was spreading. There was a Yunnan refugee who wanted to avoid being expelled, so he decided to take a risk. One night, he snuck into the house of a wealthy family and kidnapped their daughter. Xie Lian couldn't wrap his head around this. Why would he kidnap a rich family's daughter if he didn't want to leave? Mu Qing gave him a look. To marry her. The only way a daughter from a good family in the imperial capital would marry a man of Yunnan would be by force. He didn't say it plainly, but Xie Lian understood. He had never thought that there were actually people out there who would do such a thing, that something like that could happen. A sudden wave of nausea rolled up from his chest. Disgusting, Feng Shen cursed angrily on the spot. Just then, a group of aunties rushed over, grabbing and pulling at the young woman. By the looks of it, she had snuck out when her family wasn't paying attention. That young woman wouldn't yield, yelling, "I'm not afraid. I have nothing to be ashamed of. I wasn't in the wrong." Oh! Hang on. This is a deeply complicated situation. So I'm going to be super specific here. But in this moment, I stan her. Holy shit. That chick's pretty spunky, Feng Shen said, amazed. Yes, Mu Qing replied. She didn't come from an ordinary background. Her father is a high-ranking official, and her mother hails from a family of wealthy merchants in the capital. They refused to suffer this quietly, and definitely wouldn't marry off their daughter for shame's sake, so they beat that Yong'an man to death. Ooh. Soon after, all the wealthy merchants and gentlemen of renown in the capital signed a petition that listed every crime the Yong'an refugees had committed since entering the city and demanded the king jail all of them and have them severely punished. There's no need to explain where the government officials stand on this. He paused briefly, then said with a casual air, I hear that the girl's father once wanted her to enter the harem and fight for the position of the prince's consort. Your Highness must have seen her face a few times, long ago. I'm surprised you don't recognize her. I'm starting to think that she's somebody. Like, who is this chick? Xie Lian finally realized that everything was much more complicated than he had imagined. There were two sides to this tumultuous standoff, deeply entrenched within and without. The people were furious, and each side desperately wanted to kill the other. If the king's decree was partial to Yong'an, wasn't that a slap in the face to his own people? When at last he decided to distribute some aid from the royal treasury to the Yong'an refugees, it probably displeased many of the city's residents. Even more frightening than a displeased enemy was the dissatisfaction of a kingdom's own people. While technically everyone was of Shanlei, there were probably very few who believed that now. Yeah, we are like rocketing towards civil war. For so long, Xie Lian had been standing on high, unaware of all the problems of the mortal realm. However, his father was still in it. As a king, he needed money, he needed people, and in his position, the stress, the pressure, and the compromises he needed to make to solve the problems of his citizens were incomparable to the troubles Xie Lian knew. When the Yong'an refugees arrived, they took over land, made a racket, stole things, and so on. To a martial god sitting in a temple, these were all small matters that did not call for such fury. Simply endure it and it will pass. However, to the residents of the capital, these were all very real, unmanageable, intolerable tortures, a crisis waiting to erupt. It was only because he wasn't in the thick of it that he could consider these matters simple or trivial. I'm fine. Will not write an essay right now. Xie Lian couldn't help but recall the king's hair had gone even whiter than the last time he had seen him. Right, it's a president thing. You know, the president at the beginning, American president, at the beginning of his term, will look all like, well, comparably young and healthy and shit, and then be like noticeably grayed by the end of his term. Even after 4 years, not necessarily a full 8, you know? That's a very, very real thing. Lost. Here we go. Last time, the king had said he was going to diet, but he probably didn't have the energy to care anymore. When Xie Lian was younger, he firmly believed that his father was the world's greatest king. But the older he got, the more he realized that wasn't the case. Oh, now dear God, I'm fine, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. Oof. Although his father was king, he couldn't be called a wise or competent one. He was even a little corrupt and made mistakes often. Without his prestigious status, he was nothing more than a common mortal man. The more Xie Lian realized this, the more disappointed he became. The king noticed his disappointment and could not accept every disagreeing look, every disagreeing word from Xie Lian. What he couldn't accept above all, however, was having Xie Lian see his failures. No father in the world wanted his son to see his failures. Every father wanted his son to see him as the greatest. Yet Xie Lian had appeared before him at a terrible time just to berate him. You're making such a mess of things that I had to descend to help you out. As both a king and a father, how could he withstand hearing that? True, he didn't handle it well, but true. The young woman was finally hustled away by her servants, and the hundreds of other demonstrating residents continued their protest, waving signs and hollering. They were crying for only one thing. Kill them! Open fire! Show those young refugees crawling around outside the walls! A moment later, Mu Qing spoke up. Your Highness, at this point it'd be best to go back and apologize to the Heavenly Emperor. Favorable time and place and conditions. It's all lost. There's no helping this. It was just as Junwu had told him at the Palace of Divine Might. The world has its own destiny. But that was no different from telling him that the kingdom of Shanlei's time had come to an end, and to let it go. Even the queen, his mother, who wished day and night to be granted only a glimpse of him, asked him to leave with tears in her eyes when she finally saw him. How could Xie Lian not understand that they simply didn't want him to go through this difficult trial, that they'd rather he just take care of himself and watch from afar? But how could he? After a long silence, Xie Lian gravely declared, "No," and he strode out. That's the end of the chapter. We are now on page 103, or chapter 35. Quell Yong'an, Crown Prince, enters the battlefield. I just hate her so much. MXTX. This is such a brilliant, oh, what's the word? Ooh, I almost hit the mic. This is such a brilliant, just thorough example, like hypothetical, ultimately. Like, it's just such a thorough, I mean, the whole thing in of itself is kind of like an essay on resources, leadership, people, biases, so many things going on just in this one context. And she has built it so thoroughly, like from the ground up. It's stupid impressive. Like, it just touches on so many things that you could take this. I don't know if this is actually like encompasses the entire arc, so I use the term loosely, but you could take this entire arc and you could extract just so many like politically minded essays about it. It's rather unreal. That's some witchcraft bullshit. That's ridiculous. Oh. Behind him, both Feng Xin and Mu Qing were in shock. Your Highness, they cried and immediately rushed out to stand guard next to him. However, the citizens on the Grand Avenue of Divine Might had already seen the young man in white who appeared right at the center of the main street. The protesters were broken up, but soon rallied, and a crowd of thousands soon surrounded Xie Lian. The first person spoke, unsure. My lord is His Highness, the Crown Prince? The second one was doubtful. Didn't His Highness the Crown Prince ascend? He's no longer mortal, so why would he appear to us here? The third one yelled, It's him! 3 years ago at the Heavenly Ceremonial Procession, I saw him with my own eyes. It's His Highness the Crown Prince. More and more people began to recognize the face of that martial god they worshipped day and night, and Xie Lian answered them slowly. It is I have returned. The people went wild. A god descended! A god really descended! A divine being has returned to the mortal realm! Your Highness must have returned because you could no longer tolerate seeing us suffer the abuse of those thieves. Many pressed on, full of hope. Your Highness, will my lord lead us to drive out those Yang'an interlopers? It's for certain, right? It must be so. After a pause, Xie Lian answered calmly. I have returned to protect the kingdom of Shanlei, to protect my people. Fengxian and Mu Qing listened to him intently as they stood by his side, but they couldn't be sure what exactly those words meant. Yet the citizens whose minds were addled by hot blood interpreted them as they wished. As for Xie Lian, he had his own concerns. His heart was racing faster and faster, and he gritted his teeth. Believe in me. He clenched his fists and cried, Your belief will grant me greater power. With this power, I promise, I will shield Shanlei with my life and protect the common people. Please believe in me. The people had been waiting for this very moment. All they wanted was that pledge. They erupted in fervent cheers and kneeled to prostrate themselves in circles that fanned outward. We will follow my lord to the ends of the earth. We'll follow your highness. Protect Shanlei. When the residents of the imperial capital heard that a god had descended upon them, they all poured out into the streets, if only to witness the sort of miracle that wouldn't appear even once in 1,000 years. Even the capital guards, who had hurried over to address the chaos, didn't dare to be impudent. They joined the prostrating crowd. The three of them were stuck in the middle of the main street, unable to move, and Fengxian and Mu Qing tried to maintain order, shouting as they did so. Don't push! Stop pushing! However, they weren't very effective. Everyone wanted to jostle closer to His Highness the Crown Prince and touch even just a sleeve corner of this divine god from heaven, so some of His Holiness would rub off on them. Finally, the king was alerted, and it took several generals leading fully armored soldiers to break up the fervent crowd. When everyone was gone, all that was left behind was dust-filled air and messy footprints littering the ground. Xie Lian noticed something, and he bent down to pick it up. It was a single flower. After being trampled by so many, it was almost the color of the dirt below. Only a few ripped petals remained, with just a little of their original purity peeking through. That faint fragrance didn't last. It soon dispersed. There's a footnote about that sentence, the fragrance not lasting. It is a reference to a verse from Lu Yu's Ode to the Plum Blossom. Her petals may be ground in the mud, but her fragrance will endure. This verse was also referenced during the earlier sequence at the Shangguan Heavenly Ceremonial Procession, and here it serves as an ironic echo. Ow! Ow! You know, it's only footnote number 4 in this entire volume, but I'm gonna go ahead and guess, also kind of hope, that that's the most painful one. Ow! Now that he understood things a bit better, when Xie Lian returned to the palace, his temper was much softer toward the king. In turn, the king was also far more agreeable toward him. Since they both took a step back, father and son established a tentative peace between them. As for the state preceptor, it seemed he already expected Xie Lian to descend, so he didn't comment much on the subject. In the past, Xie Lian had always believed that a nation shared one heart, and that in the face of a serious issue, everyone would undoubtedly follow the direction of the king. That was only natural. However, when he actually sat down to participate, he finally learned just how vexing the position of a king really was. At court, the officials were split into small factions, and each faction had its own plans. To come to an agreement on any one matter could take up to 7 days of endless debate. Every official and every faction proclaimed that they were working for the people, but one couldn't help but suspect that might not be entirely true. I feel like this is why I and so many people we love leaders in fiction. We love like dissecting leadership in fiction because it's a fucking impossible position to be in. It's just impossible. And yet we need people to do it. We need good people to do it. And even when that happens, it's impossible. But boy, we really love watching people attempt the impossible. The officials were painfully slow at finding a consensus on how to deal with the Yunnan refugees camping outside the city who had now officially rebelled. Some advocated for direct extermination, and if there wasn't a good enough reason to do such a thing, they could simply fabricate excuses. But some disagreed with that plan. I would hope so. The revolt of Yunnan began with a natural disaster, but the situation deteriorated through human action. That family of 3 who fell to their deaths at the city gates was the worst catalyst imaginable. It always is. The officer who cut the rope would have been severely punished upon his return to the palace if his neck hadn't been snapped by Lang Ying. To put it bluntly, no matter how convoluted the circumstances, no matter the reasons, on the surface it seemed like a straightforward case of the common people rightfully rebelling against an oppressive authority. Ooh. Ooh. Now that things had devolved to the present point of complete pandemonium, fabricating more crimes to punish would only provoke further disgust, and whatever reasons they used to justify them would not work to deceive the people. But if they simply deployed an army to exterminate the refugees, it'd be without a just cause, and would destroy any illusion of benevolent authority. Yeah! Even if you had just cause. Is there just cause? Especially in this scenario, when you know that there's like a bunch of children out there who couldn't possibly be guilty of anything. Like, I don't think there's anything you could fabricate that would really justify, genocide. There I am. I said I wasn't going to write essays, and there I just tried to write one. This is her fault. This is all her fault. I got so incensed that I lost my place there again. Preventing gossip was just as important as preventing floods. Once a reputation for insensible cruelty was established, not only would the government lose the trust of its people, nearby kingdoms could seize the opportunity to invade under the pretense of eradicating a great evil. And if you've wiped out a bunch of refugees off the face of the planet, I would say you kind of qualify as a great evil. Although the irony, though, of your people being like, yeah, kill them, and then you do, and then they're like, whoa, you're evil, would absolutely happen. Because at least part of here I go, trying to write an essay again, because at least some number of the people who were like, yeah, kill them, don't actually realize what they're saying. And like, when it actually happened, they would, people, you know what I mean? However, thinking about it from a different angle, what was there to be afraid of? The Yunnan refugees were squatting in the wilderness with neither food nor arms, so how long could the revolt last? Thus, the most popular proposal in the end was this. If the Yunnan refugees dare attack, they shall be repelled and killed each time. If they don't, then they shall be left to their own devices to survive or die. Shenlei wouldn't need to waste a single resource, and the people of Yunnan would be left to exhaust themselves. I mean, I understand that this is a deeply complicated son of a bitch of a situation in which nobody is going to win. Somebody's, a lot of somebodies, are going to die, and it's just a bitch of a situation. However, it still makes me mad, and this probably explains why I identify so much with Xie Lian. It still makes me so mad that this is the conclusion that we come to. I'm writing an essay again. I'm so sorry. As a martial god, Xie Lian's descent naturally meant he had to demonstrate his worth on the battlefield, so it stood to reason that the army vigorously played up their cause. The side of His Highness the Crown Prince was the side of justice. The army of His Highness the Crown Prince was the army of God. All of a sudden, countless young men across the entire kingdom excitedly enlisted, and in a few short days, the size of the Shanlei army exploded exponentially. It caused such a stir that news of it must have reached the Yong'an camp. They had been regularly raiding in small groups, but suddenly everything stopped, as if they'd grown wary and were silently building their strength. This made the soldiers in Shanlei nervous, and over they described to Xie Lian just how terrifying that Lang Ying was, the man who was always on the front lines. The sound of his name and the memory of the infant's dead body always brought up complicated feelings for Xie Lian. The whole Lan Ying thing, I hate her. I hate her so much. It's used to such perfection in the middle of all of this to just further illustrate certain complexities. And oh my god, this is like my 10th essay. I'm so sorry. After 2 long months, of I'm starting to lose it, of waiting with bated breath, the Yong'an refugees finally launched another attack. Xie Lian only brought a short sword and didn't even wear any armor. The battle ended in under 2 hours. Blood stained everything from the earth to the sky to the reeking air itself. The remaining Yong'an warriors abandoned their gear and retreated frantically. Before the Shanlei soldiers could react, they were already surrounded by countless slain bodies. There was not a single enemy left standing. As for His Highness, the Crown Prince, he was slowly sheathing his sword without so much as a stain on his sleeves. It was a moment before they could comprehend their own overwhelming victory. They jumped and raised their swords to the sky, screaming themselves hoarse in joy. That night, the Shanlei soldiers held a victory feast atop the towers. It had been a long time since the soldiers had felt this proud and elated, and the cheers were endless as they raised their cups to praise His Highness the Crown Prince. However, Xie Lian rejected the wine, and he left the party to go to the far corner of the tower by himself, to feel the breeze and sober up. Even though he didn't drink a single cup of wine, he could still feel his heart burning, his face flushed with heat, and his fingertips trembling slightly. This was the first time in Xie Lian's life that he had killed. The very first time, and he had killed thousands. Ants. The word kept appearing in his mind. Before his might, mortals fell with a single blow. He could destroy them with even a single light squeeze. It was so easy to steal another's life, just as that palace attendant had stopped on the ants. He had almost lost his heart for reverence in between the swings of his sword. Xie Lian leaned against the parapet and drew in a few deep breaths, shaking his head to shake off the noise. And he stared absent-mindedly at the flicker of sparks in the far mountains. Soon after, the sound of footfalls approached. Even without turning his head, he knew who it was. "Aren't you two going to drink and celebrate a little?" Xie Lian asked. Wuqing humphed. "What's there to celebrate? The situation doesn't look good." Hearing that, Xie Lian turned around. "You guys noticed too?" There really wasn't anything to be optimistic about. Even though they won this round, the truth was this attack was stronger than any previous Yong'an attacks. Not only had their numbers increased, their formation, weapons, management, everything had improved significantly. Many of them were even dressed in armor. Although still simple and crude, it was obvious they already had the makings of a formal army. It was hard to believe they were actually outcast nobodies. Mu Qing crossed his arms and frowned. Extreme environments certainly force one to improve rapidly, but no matter how difficult the situation, you can't create resources out of nothing. Something's not right. Feng Xin was even more straightforward and said plainly, they must have gotten reinforcements. Xie Lian nodded. I don't believe that none of our soldiers noticed either, Mu Qing added, but they're still celebrating because they have you on their side. They believe it's a sure victory. Xie Lian didn't think much of that. It's the first battle I was involved in and we won. It's fine to let them enjoy it a bit. Just think of it as improving morale. Though he hesitated briefly, Feng Xin still asked in the end, Your Highness, you don't look so good. Are you still creating rain in Yong'an? Yeah, Xie Lian replied. As expected, disapproval appeared on Mu Qing's face. Excuse my bluntness, but it's pointless to create rain now. That's the real bottomless hole. Your Highness, even if the drought in Yong'an could be entirely relieved, the crowd outside the city walls probably wouldn't back off. I know, Xie Lian said. But my reign isn't meant to make these people retreat. It's for those who remained in Yong'an, to make sure they don't die of thirst. That was my original goal, and I won't change it for anything. Feng Xin was still worried. Can you really keep this up? Xie Lian patted his shoulder. Don't worry, I have 8,000 temples. There are plenty of devotees, so I'm fine, of course, but... His other arm circled around Mu Qing's shoulders, and Xie Lian sighed. Thank goodness you two helped today. Thank you for staying by my side. That day on the battlefield, his two subordinates suffered much more than he did. They were absolutely covered in blood and grime from all the killing. There's no need to say such things, Feng Xin said, and Mu Qing gave a non-committal grunt. Xie Lian squeezed the other two close and said earnestly, not just for today, but for always. Thank you both so much. I hope the sight of the three of us standing tall and fighting together will inspire a story for the ages. A moment later, Feng Xin burst out laughing while Mu Qing said incredulously, How do you always say things with such shameless confidence? You're really... He shook his head. Never mind. Xie Lian's lips finally curled up, but the smile didn't last long and he suddenly froze. Who's there? Xie Lian sorry, I just... Xie Lian's sword was unsheathed. God, say that 10 times fast. With a light flick of his blade, he plucked a shadow from the corner of the parapet. The person had been hiding in the corner for a long time, holding his breath, and had surprisingly gone unnoticed until now. Xie Lian had only intended to scare him by hanging him off the tip of his sword, but he had killed too aggressively on the battlefield that day. His arms were still shaking and his hands lost control. His simple flick was too powerful, and he threw the person right over the wall. Under the moonlight, all three of them were able to see clearly that the person's uniform and gear were that of their own army, and he himself looked like a boy of maybe 14 or 15. The boy hung in midair for a moment, and one breath later, his form disappeared as he plummeted toward the ground below. Oh no, Xie Lian cried internally, and he leapt out. As he dove over the side, he hooked his foot onto the edge of the parapet, and he swiftly reached out and managed to grab the boy's arm. The young soldier's body dangled in midair and swung back and forth a few times before he looked up. Their eyes met, and borrowing the faint moonlight, Xie Lian was able to see his face. His eyes widened. It's 5 o'clock. that was the end of the chapter. We will begin on Tuesday on page 113 for chapter 36, which is called, upon Ubeji? Because I don't think the Z is actually pronounced. Guessing, upon Beiji Hill, the crown prince falls into the devil's nest. How many pages was that since we read for a full 2 hours? Essays notwithstanding. That stopped on page 111. We started on page 57. Ooh, that ain't bad. That ain't bad. That was about right on the money of my guess. Huh. Oh, did we freeze? It doesn't look like it. Okay. Yeah, we got, that's, woof. We may actually finish on time, ultimately, so that I can get to volume 4. Ooh, no, it's, the last volume of Moda Zushi before we do volume 4. We do volume 4 of Heaven Official's Blessing for June, for Gay Pride, for my birthday month. Well, hell. Sorry, I'm everywhere at once at the moment. Okay, we'll be picking up on page 113 for chapter 36 on Tuesday at this usual time, 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. God, that was, once again, a time. That was a time. We continue to have a time. And now this boy is 14 or 15. Interesting. 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 Of course he joined the military force. Of course he did. You know, we will deal with this on Tuesday. So, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you continue to have a time. I'm certainly having an experience. I don't know if you noticed. I will see you guys on Tuesday. Please, please, please take care of yourselves. And I will see you on Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time for more of this time with Volume 3 of Heaven Official's Blessing. You guys have a wonderful rest of your day, afternoon, night, morning, whatever applies to you. And I will see you very, very soon.